edges. But, so one of the things that I wanted to mention was like, this needs to be varnished. These aren't coming out the way they will eventually. But this tree right here, see this shadow tone relative to these shadow tones? That's kind of what I wanted to speak specifically about.
It's beautiful.
This shadow right here is the same greens. See how it's pushed back a little bit? It's not as dark, a little bit more opaque. It's not as vivid. It's not quite as vivid green as these. And it's a little bit cooler. And so, and then we have this overlap. So this atmospheric perspective is affecting this. Oh, that's undertone. You can see I've got some of my tone canvas showing through here in spots. See that shadow? As things go farther away, the dark of the shadow is not going to be as dark. And we talked about linear perspective. See how this, like for example, this grass shape, see how big that is compared to these other shapes? Pulls it forward, makes it come forward in space. So linear or a geometric perspective is super important. As things get smaller as they get farther away. And overlaps.
So do you ever use your sky color mixing in to create the atmosphere? You know, add some of that as you move back to make it meld better with the...
You got to be careful doing that because you start throwing your sky color in and things start getting chalky. Because it's just too cool usually.
Right, because
Yeah.
you're really
Can
good
have a
at
little
not
bit.
being chalky.
Yeah,
That's
well, that's
one of your strengths.
It's
no
hard.
chalk here.
Yeah, and that just comes from I don't just throw indiscriminate whites and blues and stuff in. I'm careful to make sure that like whenever I'm mixing my colors, I'm not just randomly grabbing some white and mixing it in and hoping it works. I take the time to mix that color. I take the time to mix that color. I take the time to mix that color. See what I mean? I'm not, and then when I apply it, I don't overwork it. I don't keep on poking and prodding and pushing it around because that makes it chalky and muddy too. Or vice versa. Chalky tends to mean it's too cool. Muddy tends to mean it's, just muddy.
So what color do you add to your green for the rear one versus the forward one?
Yeah.
What are those two?
So I just took that same shadow tone and I just cooled it down and I added a little bit of, if I had a gray mixture, I might have taken like a mid-dark gray and added to that a little bit. I'm not thinking of specific colors when I'm mixing. I'm thinking of warm, cool, light, dark. If I get my pile of green out there, I have a big pile. Not just one brush load, I have a pile, a mass of green. And then I take that, I use that as my mother color, and then I'll differentiate in the landscape. I don't use formulas like that.
You start with the dark and go light, or you start with the light and go dark?
Yeah, this is all painted opaquely, so almost always when you're painting opaque, you almost always work from dark to light.
Do you mean on your trees, do you start with the shadow and then
Yep.
the light? Okay.
Yep.
So you really think of that value range of the warm and cool versus in
Yeah.
terms of color. That's really fascinating.
So
That's the key of the day.
yeah, so I just want to encourage you guys to think about overlaps to create space, to think about your perspective, the atmospheric perspective, and your geometric or linear perspective. Because this is, it's very simple, but it's hard to use in the midst of a painting sometimes because you start thinking about other stuff that's not important. The tendency for novices is to just start thinking about details. And if they get enough details, it's going to be a painting, and it isn't. It's about masses. Get your masses going. Get your big things in front, your smaller things behind. Get your atmospheric perspective going. Your you're graying or you're cooling in the distance, you know, that's the thing about atmospheric perspective. The most vivid colors are gonna be towards the front, whereas the more muted colors are gonna be towards in the back. And then think about overlaps.
So that's why you're hammering me on mine over there, because you, as your atmosphere, as your linear perspective is working, your horizon line is lower.
Yeah.
And that's what you're telling me, and I wasn't seeing it. I just had this thing like that. Okay.
Yeah, so that's, I just want to
I agree with
encourage you
that.
guys to think about that stuff. We always come back to this one. What's the reason for the painting? Do you want depth of space? If you want depth of space, then make sure you try to employ as much of this as possible to drive that space, because you're working on a two-dimensional surface. So to get that three-dimensional quality is, you know, you want to employ as many tools as you can to push that thing back. But like the linear perspective, you can see how big this path is here compared to here.
Yeah.
You'll see that even these water reflections, I intentionally made them bigger and these smaller. And, you know, like I said, in this grass, this is intentionally bigger and that's smaller. And these bushes are much bigger, these are smaller. You can tell my eye level's right in here. These trees are much bigger, these trees are much smaller. You see how cool and muted they got. You know, they only look green. If you were to isolate that color, it wouldn't look green. It wouldn't look green on the palette when you mix it. But relative to these greens, it jives.
It works beautifully.
And
So what do you think is your center of interest? Because I'll tell you what my favorite part of the painting is.
well, I think it's pretty obvious. It's right where the paint leads you. It's right where all the, you know, the greatest contrast. I have shape contrast. I have direction contrast. You can see how, you know, I have more rectangular shapes versus more curvilinear shapes. Everything up here is very curvilinear except for this. I've got more texture down here. I've got more vivid colors, more vivid muted contrast going on down here. So all the contrast,
Yeah.
there's a lot more contrast there than there is up here. Much more than there is here. Much more than there is here. And over here, you know, painting is very common sense. It's just trying to remember those things, you know, so that's the reason why there's so many lists out there. You know, do this first, and then do that next, then do that next. But, you know, so you think about your content, think about your focal point, think about your eye movement. You know, I have the eye coming up in here. That's kind of the eye movement right in there. And I think about how to lead the eye through the sky. I think about how to lead the eye through the foreground. And I don't worry about details.
No, I mean, that's one of the
They-
things that's appealing about you.
That's, you know, the viewer's mind will take care of that.
Right.
It's not necessary. If you get the masses correct and your values and colors and such, all the abstract properties, if you get those all working right, our brains invent details.
This part in here is I love this, that it's loose, but it pulls you in and the color is just right. It really works well.
But just think about some of those, you know, the overlaps. You can see that this is definitely in front of that. This is in front of that. This is in front of that. It's ahead of that. You know, we have all these obvious overlaps. This is such an obvious composition. That's a very traditional kind of composition, but it's, you know, it's simple and it's strong. That's what you're going for with painting. Painting isn't, you know, it doesn't work unless you're very, very adept, which nobody here is, not even myself, at, you know, at creating a lot of illusions of realism. It's important to think about the abstract composition,
Yeah.
because the eye takes care of a lot of stuff. So I'm not done with that. I'm going to make some adjustments to my greens and stuff stuff like that. But you see, I'm taking my time. I got it all blocked in. I've made my second color pass. So now I just go in and just start making adjustments. And then you can see where I've got some, even we were talking about form last week. So you see where there's the warm and the cool on the shadow side. You see where there's warm and cool on the lit side.
And your warm isn't on the edge, it's in. On the warm side of the turkey.
Yeah, I don't know if I would agree with that, but yeah, it's kind of randomly placed. So that's, that was all I just wanted to talk about these things. And so this atmospheric perspective, remember we talked about there's like diminished distinction because of our eyes, because of vision, things get less distinguished as they get farther away. And then of course with atmospheric perspective, the vivid colors are going to be forward in the picture plane. The muted colors are going to recede. And that's all just part of how that, the moisture in the atmosphere affects what things we look at. And then overlaps, they're all pretty obvious there. Linear perspective. You can see that this cloud is ahead of these clouds. Why? Because of linear perspective. Because he's so much bigger. And that's the thing. Try not to mince on it. Try not to be too subtle about that stuff. This needs to be hanging on a wall, and somebody walks into a room and sees it, and bam, it hits them. The idea hits them right away. It's not cute. It's not subtle. It's not. See what I mean? Paintings need to be very obvious, because that's just humans. There's lots of subtlety going on. Subtlety in the colors. But that's one of the reasons why when you're choosing photos to copy or editing your photo to copy, think about how it's going to read to the viewer. If you're painting a portrait and all of a sudden you have a lot of other things going on like that, like your child portrait, if you've got the face here and it's so these are the eyes and the nose and the mouth or whatever, and then all of a sudden over here you have something really dark going on, and over here you have something very vivid going on. You see what I mean? It's like, the photo isn't telling the viewer what the painting is about. So that's your job as the painter, is to take that photo and say, okay, that I don't need, that I don't need. What I need is this, and I need elements that support that. It's all about that stage directing. You're directing a play, directing a symphony, you're writing a symphony. And it's important that we keep what's important. You start out with your content or your concept. What's the most important? And go from there. And always try to retain that, because it's real easy to get caught up in painting details. I mean, I could go up in here, gee whiz, with colors and stuff. I could go up here and I could start throwing in yellows and oranges and vivid greens and bright, that color I could start throwing in just because, like, ooh, it tastes so good. Candy is so delicious, but it doesn't work in a painting. The idea is restraint, reserve. Reserve is strength. So that's a common saying for some artists. The strength is in the reserve. Hold back, hold back. And I know you love that cadmium red light. That's so beautiful. I love it too. Hold back.
Are you talking directly to me?
I'm talking to all of us. And this is all just information for me too.
I have no restraint. So I have a question. I know we're working from photographs, and do you ever find that something, you don't want to be totally through the photograph because maybe what nature's presenting is not what you're best. You know what I mean?
I hear what you're saying, so what's your point?
Well, so like I find that big cloud in the center really distracting, because the rest is so beautiful, but that is so intense to me that it takes away from the beauty below. And I know that, like the one to the right and the one behind that, I know you really work on balancing the whole composition, and I get it, but, it's just my initial take.
That's okay, yeah. Well, I'm not really interested in your opinion.
No, I mean, that's fine, but, it's just, because
Yeah.
it's so beautiful, but but then again, like, with the photograph, your color usage is just exquisite.
Well, so then, the thing is if I decided to quiet down these whites up here,
Right,
the reason that they're working is because they're close in harmony. This color is a transition for that value. You got transitional values. And so if I decided to change these whites and make them less white, it wouldn't read like a cloud anymore.
no, right, but I'm just
Yeah.
thinking the whole affair is too dark for me. It takes away from the bottom. That's all.
I don't think I agree with you,
But
but that's okay.
no, because
So
you have
anyway,
your.
let's just get back to the subject at hand. We go down too many rabbit trails. So just think about that, linear perspective, atmospheric perspective, overlaps.
Right.
Think about color harmony, just like
Right.
those greens on that painting.
Yeah.
That it's really easy if you're not being careful to throw in a color that just doesn't work with the other colors around it. A blue within a bunch of greens like that. Especially if it's a foreground color. Because there's a lot of harmony in nature. That's one of the keys about nature, is that there's so much harmony out there. Every color is related. And that's one of the reasons I encourage you guys to use a limited palette, to try to keep your colors related for a while.
One of the things that I noticed that Carlson, in his book, said when you're painting, you're not copying colors
Yeah.
either.
Right.
Just like you're not, when you look at, you
Yeah.
move things and it's not, you don't have to copy what's there. You make
Yeah.
it what
You have to make aesthetic choices.
aesthetic choices, right?
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to, but
But
it's going to
it-
work best.
If it works
Yeah.
better for the painting.
Yes, that's all. We're just trying to elevate our game. We want to elevate our game beyond trying to copy a photograph, because nobody here is adept at copying the photographs anyway. It's like keep on working and trying to copy photographs, and nobody's even getting close. And even if you do, it's not going to work out the way you think it is.